started. You know, this is our monthly press conference, and we always try to pick topics that are relevant to the public and also will help educate the public to better understand some of the issues that we deal with here in the District Attorney's Office and that impact our community. Elder abuse and fraud is a huge problem. I don't know that it's spoken about in most circles, but it happens all the time. And we're going to see it more and more often as the baby boomers get older. It's going to be a far greater issue than it is today. We have a Resident Abuse and Neglect Act, and I can give you all a cite to that if you need it, that allows a state to charge those who intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly use a resident's property for another person's profit, advantage, or benefit without legal entitlement to do so. And obviously this is about someone who is living in a facility, a nursing home or some other kind of facility. Now, other financial crimes that affect the elderly, or the typical crimes that apply to everyone, and that could be embezzlement, fraud, or forgery. The burden of proof requires that the property was used without the legal entitlement to do so. And that means someone who is older, someone is using or taking advantage of their property and they have no legal entitlement to do so. Typically, the best way to prove this is the victim's testimony to meet our burden of proof. And as prosecutors, oftentimes we know something happened, we know it was illegal, but we can't prove it. And we have an ethical and professional responsibility to make sure that we can sustain that burden of proof. Oops. You want to just come on in and I'll talk slow in slow motion. Seniors really are a bullseye for con artists. Financial exploitation is a fast-growing form of abuse of seniors and adults with disabilities. And again, common sense. It often involves someone who's closely in tune with a vulnerable adult, such as a caretaker, a family member, neighbor, friends, pastors. We've had situations with that, doctors or nurses. And when you work with someone, when you take care of someone, when you know of someone and you see them on a regular basis, it's really easy to gain their trust and to use that trust to take advantage of them. 70% of the wealth in this country is in the hands of people who are 55 years of age or older. So these are the people to target, and con artists and criminals, would-be criminals, scammers are very aware of this fact and put in a lot of time and energy on trying to scam the elderly. Financial exploitations of seniors is a problem that's estimated to cost $3 billion per year. I would say that that's probably lowballing it by quite a bit, because so many of the cases we never learn about, we don't know about, and certainly for cases that we can't prosecute. Talking about some statistics, 1 in 9 seniors report being abused, neglected, or exploited in the past 12 months. Now this statistic, I'm sure, includes physical abuse as well, right, Kayla?
Yes.
And neglect. And you know, that's a big issue too, because oftentimes we don't have the resources to take care of someone that's elderly, and they may have special needs and require all sorts of attention. And I would say that this number, this is 1 in 9 seniors reports. I don't have a clue what the real number would be, but I would say at least double that, if not more, because most of what's going on is not reported. And again, elder abuse is vastly underreported. Only 1 in 44 cases of financial abuse is ever reported. And there's all sorts of reasons for this. And then this aligns with other kinds of cases that we prosecute. Victims feel ashamed. They're dependent on the people that are abusing them or taking advantage of them. And many suffer from memory loss, so they don't remember. They thought that they had $600 in their checking account, and but now it's only $200, and maybe They just don't remember, so they don't know what to do about it. If you have your family members taking care of you and you're dependent on them for your care, you certainly don't want to accuse them. And then a lot of them feel guilty or feel ashamed that they're even in this situation, and they don't want to rock the boat, so to speak. Cognitive impairment and the need for help with daily activities makes victims more vulnerable to financial abuse. Obviously, the ones that are independent and are able to take care of themselves are less likely, although they too are vulnerable. Almost 1 in 10 financial abuse victims will turn to Medicaid as a direct result of their own monies being stolen from them. And that indicates that they have the financial resources to take care of themselves, but when money's stolen from them, they lose those resources and they become dependent upon the government. I have heard of cases in the past, 14 years since I've been DA, where a woman, I believe it was a pastor in that situation, took advantage of her, and she literally lost 100% of her savings and net worth and had nothing to live on, had no money to purchase medicine, and it really was a life-threatening kind of situation. I think it's also important to note that these kinds of crimes aren't real sexy, because people don't look at the human story. It's not like a murder, which we can all identify with, or a young child. And so hopefully by bringing attention to this, we can make it sexy by telling the backstory, and that is a lot of elderly can't survive their medicine, where they live, how they're able to be cared for is dependent upon their life savings. Common signs of exploitation, and this is important for people who care for an older person, and I don't mean care for as in taking care of their daily needs, but we just have people in our lives that are older that we care about. Some of the common signs are unpaid bills. If you find out that someone is getting notices and bills aren't being paid, it could also be a sign that someone may not be able to take care or manage their own personal business. Missing property, large or unexplained withdrawals from bank accounts, and transfers between accounts are real important. And one of the good things about this is that it leaves a paper trail. So we've got the paper trail. We just need to prove that the elderly person was not aware and did not give permission. Changes in banks or attorneys. Important mail is no longer coming to the victim's home. Some of these people are so blatant that they actually will change the addresses, and they'll be getting the elderly person's mail if they're not living there in the home to get it themselves. Unfamiliar signatures on checks and other documents, and I think banks are alerted to this. Changes in spending patterns. I think banks also are alerted to this. Lack of personal amenities such as clothing and grooming items. They're simply don't have the funds to take care of themselves and provide for their needs. Common scams. You don't even have to be old to get all of the scams on emails. Lottery and sweepstakes scams. You've already won, just send $2,500 to cover your taxes. Home repair and traveling common. And that's really hard, and oftentimes when we get involved in kinds of cases where someone's been taken advantage of, somebody was going to put on a new roof, restucco a house, they give the individual $10,000 and then they never see that person again. And we often have to say, well, we don't know if there's criminal intent at the time that the money was accepted. And it may end up being a civil matter rather than a criminal matter. And civilly, the burden of proof is a lot less. The grandparent scam, you're called and told your grandson is in jail and needs you to spend money immediately. And charity scams, people that are trying to solicit money for different kinds of charity. Predatory lending. As people get older, I think it's common knowledge that their brains don't function the same, so they're not quite as astute and calculating in how they spend their money, what they have, and what is a good investment or not. Investment and security schemes. Internet phishing, identity theft, Medicare scams, telemarketing scams, health, funeral, and life insurance. The elderly really are victims to so many kinds of things. And I was sitting on a panel, I believe it was last summer, with Adult Protective Services, and one of my comments was, you know, there is no windfall in life. I mean, when somebody, and the elderly need to be aware of that, that if somebody sends you an email saying, you know, you just won $100,000, send me $1,000 and we'll be able to pay the processing fees and get you your money. You know, that's not really going to happen in this life. None of us are going to have $100,000 drop in our lap. But then someone after the panel presentation came up to me and said, you know, a lot of people don't have what they need to provide for themselves. Medication is real expensive. All of their expenses are really expensive. And so they fall victim to these kinds of things because they're hopeful. They see that as a light at the end of the tunnel, and they will be able to meet their expenses if they were to get that $100,000. So I would say that, you know, we need to be aware that probably there are no windfalls in life, and to make sure that the elderly around us have a good appreciation for that. I would say the majority of fraud is from the family, the actual family members and or caregivers, but I would say the majority is from family. And examples of fraud committed by family or caregivers, or say using a power of attorney given by the victim to allow another person to handle his or her finances. And it really gives that individual a license to steal. There's all sorts of reasons why one may need to give a power of attorney, but you have to be really careful, and that person needs to be held accountable. Because basically, when someone has a power of attorney, it's very difficult for us to prove our case, if not impossible. Then wouldn't you say it almost makes it impossible if they're acting with the power of attorney? It's a license to steal, is what it is. Taking advantage of joint bank accounts. And most elderly, and probably most of us, have joint bank accounts. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but it's also very dangerous because someone else has access to that bank account, and that becomes another prosecution issue. Misusing ATM or credit cards, stealing money or things of value. And this is a really common thing, especially when people are living in a residential facility, the elderly, where they may have jewelry or they may have certain prized possessions, and they just disappear. And nobody knows where they went, and nobody asks any questions. Threatening to abandon, hit, or otherwise harm the victim. And it's not uncommon for caregivers or family members to say, you know, I can't do this unless you pay me, or I can't do this, or they learn to manipulate, not to the benefit of the elderly person. Signing over property by deceit, coercion, emotional abuse, making promises, or intimidation. In-home providers charging for services, keeping change from errands, is paying bills which don't belong to the adult, asking the victim to sign falsified timesheets, spending their work time not doing what they are paid to do. All of these are, and you can imagine how this could happen very easily. Now, the effects of financial exploitation on the elderly, common sense, you know, a loss of trust, loss of security. How secure can someone feel if they don't know what they have, and whatever they have, they assume someone's going to steal? Depression is already an issue with the elderly. Feelings of fear, shame, guilt, anger, self-doubt, remorse, worthlessness, financial destitution, and that happens time and time again. Inability to replace lost assets. And a lot of these assets were earned over a lifetime with the hope and the promise of being able to leave something to their children, to their other family members. And this is gone. And in a way, a lot of people view that as their legacy or their life's work, and so they're deprived of that. Becoming reliant on government safety net programs, which we all know are very limited and lacking in resources. Inability to provide for long-term care needs because they don't have the financial wherewithal to do that. Loss of a primary residence, and I have talked to a number of families who had to sell the family home because their elderly loved one was in a financial crunch because of fraud or embezzlement, and the inability to hire an attorney to pursue legal protection and remedies. And a lot of these elderly people are very isolated. They don't have the mental wherewithal, and they don't even have the understanding that they can take care of the situation. Then they come and talk to us, and we're not really that optimistic because of all the hurdles that we need to jump. Since 2009, the white-collar crimes unit of our office received only a handful of these unique cases. This crime is highly underreported and difficult to prosecute for any variety of reasons, all of which I've spoken about. And victims are often unable to testify because they are physically or mentally infirm. And it takes about 1 year to 2 years to bring a case to trial. And often in that period of time, they could become more mentally or physically infirm, or they could die. It's not uncommon that they don't live long enough to see a case to conclusion. Right now, our office is reviewing 2 resident exploitation cases. Resident exploitation cases, again, is someone living in some kind of facility. We have some case examples up here that basically outline some of the problems. We are looking at Misty Salazar, and she was taking care of a 60-year-old man who was incapacitated in December of 2012. She drove the victim's truck to pick up his Social Security check and did not return. She was found 2 weeks later driving the stolen truck, and she admitted to denuding the victim's bank account to pay for drugs. The trickle effect, or how this impacted the individual: because of the theft, the victim was unable to pay for the loan on the truck, and the bank had begun the repossession process. Her abrupt absence made it difficult for the victim to get daily jobs of life done, and that's just basically taking care of himself. And he was tasked with even more stress communicating with the banks and finding a way to pay bills. And he was able to attempt this. A lot of victims aren't even able to attempt communication with other institutions and organizations to try to figure out exactly what happened. In October of 2013, Ms. Salazar pled guilty to exploitation of a resident's property over $2,500, but less than $20,000, embezzlement of a motor vehicle, and embezzlement over $500. She also admitted to a prior possession of a controlled substance. She was sentenced to 1 year of incarceration, followed by 3 years supervised probation, and she's ordered to pay restitution. You know, what's ironic in this case is when someone's ordered to pay restitution, she would, over a 3-year period of time, the victim may be dead before the restitution can be made. So that victim will never be made whole again. And I would argue that in any of these cases, the victim is never made whole. You can never undo the damage that is done. And I would like to introduce, we have a guest here that we would like to introduce. And actually that is one of the reasons why that gave me the idea to do this. And I'm looking for this here on this piece of paper. Stephen Watson contacted me because his parents were victims and was very upset because after having some contact with our office was told that there's really nothing we can do about this. So I would like to invite him up here to talk about his situation and really put a face on this problem and talk about how devastating it is to the family.
Thank you. Good morning. My mother and stepfather moved to Albuquerque from Gallup in 2006. Dr. Hinkebrun was a retired college administrator, and my mother, Joanne, was a retired school teacher. They moved here to get closer to family and medical support. My mother went through a series of surgeries which required some personal assistance, and her insurance company sent an agency aide to help her, but my mother required more than the insurance covered. So the agency aide recommended a friend of hers to help out, and this second woman began working for my mother in early 2010. The caregiver continued to work for my mother when my stepfather passed away in February of 2012. A month later, my sister and I discovered that the caregiver had acquired a bank card and had extracted about $2,200 from their bank account. My mother then let us know that she was aware of the fact that the caregiver had taken monies from, forged checks from a previous banking institution they had belonged to, and the bank had caught the theft. But my mother made a choice not to prosecute at that time, had forgiven the caregiver and kept her on. That was about $15,000, and then when I reviewed bank statements from a banking institution where they had first been using when they had hired the woman in early 2010, I discovered about $79,000 in forged checks. So the total is about $117,000 in this particular case, and the possibility of jewelry and artwork that may also be stolen. We went immediately to the police and in the current banking institution, and she was arrested in May of 2012. The bank repaid my mother part of the monies that were taken, but my mother passed away then at the end of August of last year, 2013, as the district attorney's office was processing the case. Although there was a substantial amount of evidence against this caregiver, it required the testimony of my mother to corroborate it and tie it all together. But because my mother was the linchpin in this case, when she died, the case necessarily collapsed. And in March of this year, I wrote to Ms. Brandenburg to discuss the issue of caregiver theft with her. I believe that there are probably at least four different avenues to address this type of theft. Three of them are preventative. There needs to be a greater effort at educating the public about the potential vulnerability of theft to seniors by people who are hired to assist them and when they're sometimes physically or mentally incapacitated. Getting the word out to seniors and their families about what to watch out for, monitoring bank accounts, lists of contents of jewelry boxes and so on, and then when that theft is discovered, to report it immediately. Secondly, caregivers who work through agencies or retirement facilities and so on, usually the facility or the caregivers are licensed and bonded, but independent caregivers are not. This needs to change, and I think the state legislature may be able to provide some relief in this line. They need to provide some kind of licensure and background checks to anybody. Additionally, anybody who's been proven guilty of this kind of theft in either a civil or a criminal case should have all their professional licensing removed. Third, Congress needs to have the banking institutions more credibly monitor these kinds of vulnerable accounts and alert the families and elderly accordingly. And finally, I've asked Ms. Brandenburg to look at the policies and practices within the DA's office to expedite these cases because of the fact, as she's expressed, most of these people are elderly and there's always a chance that they're going to die before it goes to trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Adult Protective Services has participated by providing us information in this press conference, and we regret that they were unable to be here, but they do a lot of work in protecting the elderly. The New Mexico Adult Protective Services Act includes a duty to report, much like child abuse provision, which states that anyone who suspects that an adult is being abused, neglected, or exploited has a duty to report that information to Adult Protective Services. So there is a duty to report. Adult Protective Services investigates allegations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of adults who are unable to protect themselves. In 2013, they conducted 6,092 investigations of adult abuse, neglect, and exploitation statewide. And once again, the number we know is a lot higher than that. They were able to substantiate allegations of exploitation in 254 cases last year. So do you realize the huge disparity? These kinds of cases are very, very difficult to prove. And most victims are older or over the age of 60. That's really old if you're over the age of 60. Right, Stuart?
Would I know anything about that?
Okay. And most perpetrators or younger, usually under the age of 60. APS substantiates or unsubstantiates allegations based upon a preponderance of the evidence and may provide short-term services to prevent future risk of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. They cannot conduct criminal investigations, file charges, or arrest perpetrators. They're kind of like CYFD. They have to work with law enforcement. And when they encounter a crime, the case is referred to law enforcement and may also be referred to the Attorney General's office or other state agencies as appropriate. Mr. Watson, did APS get involved in your situation?
Not in this case, no.
Okay. Exploitation allegations involving adults with decisional capacity are the most difficult to pursue. Sometimes alleged victims refuse to cooperate, and this happens frequently, with an investigation because the alleged perpetrator is a family member or a friend. So what can we do? Once again, we gave you a few ideas on taking steps to protect. Elders, reduce isolation, order a background check, and this is what Mr. Watson indicated, order a background check for caregivers, service providers, and so on. And make sure that if you're using a company, make sure that company does that. Because I'm not sure all companies do that. And what kind of a background check is it? Is it the last year? Is it the last 5 years? How extensive that is. And certainly see what can be done to check people that are working independently. Monitor credit reports to know what's going on and to know it as soon as possible. Get caller ID so you can be aware of who's calling the home, or if a bank is calling or other people are calling to report some suspicious conduct. Craft documents with care. Arrange for provision in the power of attorney document to have a third party review the appointed person's actions or mandate joint powers of attorney. And that would mean, say, a joint power of attorney, 2 people would have to be involved in the decision. And that, I think, is real key. Arrange for another pair of eyes. Have financial institutions send monthly statements to other family members to check for inaccuracies and fraud. And I think that banking institutions are more cooperative. If you go and talk to them and tell them what the problem is, they'll watch the account. And they will maybe sooner call when they feel something suspicious is going on. Don't leave the mail in an unsecured mailbox. This is really important to protect identity. Shred documents with identifying information. List and photograph jewelry and valuables, and this is important. I would even suggest that if you are moving someone into a facility, not let them take expensive jewelry, even if it's a wedding band or sentimental, but not let them have that at the facility, because I would say chances are greater than not that that will go missing. If you suspect, and I've asked for the media to make sure that you put this number in any report, if you suspect an adult is being abused, neglected, or exploited, please call Adult Protective Services. We do have a relationship with them. They have a relationship with law enforcement, and that number is 1-866-654-3219. And this is, it seems like most of the issues that we deal with, everyone needs to be a part of the solution if we're going to work towards a solution. All of us have some responsibility.
I got a question for you. I want to scoot over this way first, though, if I could.
Kari, in your story, you know, one of the things you call for very specifically is some kind of licensure and regulation of independent caregivers. What do you think of that? Is that something that our legislature needs to look at? Do you agree with that? And would you support something like that?
I think it's essential, given the fact that our population is aging. I think it's critical. We would support it, and I think that we could cut down on some of this elder abuse if we did that.
You were particularly eloquent when I walked in a little late, talking about power of attorney.
Right.
And I was hoping maybe you would review that for me for a second. You said it was a license for something.
It's a license to steal if the person with the power of attorney chooses to use it as that. And you know, a power of attorney is a document saying that if I'm not able to make this decision, then so-and-so will act in my stead. And so basically, say if I were to have my parents' power of attorney, I could sell their house out from under them. I could spend money from their bank account. I could make critical decisions that would impact their financial well-being under the veil of, or the shield of the law, because I have a power of attorney. And we mentioned as one of the possible solutions to this is when you have a power of attorney, and it's smart to have a power of attorney in certain instances, and certainly as you get older, but have a joint power of attorney. So instead of having one person on it, have two people on it. So there's oversight. So if my parents put my brother and me on it, then I couldn't sell the house without my brother signing on. Hopefully he would be more honest than me if that was my intention. So that's an example. I'm not going to sell my parents' house out from under them. And I don't have a power of attorney for them. So anyway, but you know, that's just an example of how we have to be really careful. And we want to believe that the people around us are loving and kind and taking care of us because they want to, and that they would never do anything that would harm us. But I think that may be a bit naive, and they can get into scrapes, and so we just need to be very careful to protect what we have. The elderly need to be very careful to protect what they have so they can continue to provide for themselves in the way that they've planned to their whole life.
Kari, you were talking about common scams. You mentioned predatory lending, but correct me if I'm wrong. Does New Mexico has a law against that, right?
There's a law against that with certain restrictions, but that's not to keep a neighbor going to another neighbor, an elderly person going to a neighbor and saying, hey, I need this money, and for the neighbor to say, hey, you know what, I can loan you $100 if you pay me back $250 on Friday.
So informal.
Right, it could happen like that, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of, they say that, you know, as you get older, the part of your brain that deals with figures and planning is the part that starts to not function as well. And so if you're talking to someone 85, they may not really understand, well, wait a minute, I'm giving 100 and I'm paying back 250. They may think, wow, I get 100 and everything's cool. And it may not compute the same as if you're talking to someone that's 25. Maybe the 25 and the 80-year-old are in the same boat, but you don't, I mean, you get the gist of what I'm saying.
One more question, if I could. Mr. Watson was saying that, I guess his mother died, right?
And he's free to answer the question as well.
Well, actually, I wanted you to respond to why you couldn't prosecute